When we talk about the brain, most people imagine it as some kind of perfect recording device, a camera that captures reality exactly as it is. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Your brain isn't a recorder, it's a storyteller. It doesn't take the world in as raw data. It constructs it, piece by piece, using bits of sensory information and an enormous amount of memory, expectation, and emotion. You don't see the world as it is, you see it as you are. Right now, as you listen, your brain isn't simply hearing my words, it's filling in meaning, tone, and emotion based on every experience you've ever had with voices, authority, curiosity, and trust. You think you're perceiving me directly, but your brain is interpreting, predicting, shaping. It's taking a chaotic flood of electrical signals from your eyes and ears and weaving them into a coherent, believable story. It's guessing, constantly guessing. Imagine two people standing in the same room. One sees opportunity, the other sees threat. The light, the sound, the faces, everything is identical, but their internal worlds are not. Why? Because perception isn't objective, it's personal. It's filtered through the brain's predictive model of what reality should be. And those models are built from the past, your upbringing, your habits, your emotional patterns, your fears, your victories. You're not just responding to what's out there. You're responding to what your brain expects to be out there. It's a remarkable system. The reason you can walk through a crowded room without bumping into people, the reason you can recognize a friend from across the street, the reason a song can make you cry, it's all because your brain is not passively receiving information, but actively creating experience. But here's the catch, that same creative process that helps you navigate life can also trap you. If your brain has learned that the world is unsafe, that you're not enough, that failure means humiliation, it will keep predicting that pattern. And it will filter every new experience through that story, even if reality no longer fits. This is why awareness is so powerful. When you become aware that your thoughts are not necessarily truth, you gain a new kind of freedom. You begin to notice how your brain edits and exaggerates, how it adds color, texture, and emotion to events that might otherwise be neutral. You start catching yourself mid-story, realizing, wait, this is just one version of what's happening. The moment you recognize that, you interrupt the automatic storytelling. You stop being a passive character and start becoming the narrator. It's also why gratitude, mindfulness, and perspective shifts work. Not because they magically change the external world, but because they literally train your brain to construct different stories about it. Each time you choose to focus on what's working instead of what's missing, each time you step back from reaction and observe instead, you're sculpting neural networks that support clarity over chaos, curiosity over fear. You're not tricking yourself, you're tuning yourself, and the science supports it. fMRI studies show that perception areas of the brain, like the visual cortex, are shaped not only by sensory input, but by the prefrontal cortex, by your beliefs, your goals, your predictions. The brain literally sees what it expects to see. That means your expectations, the quiet narratives running in the background of your mind, are not just influencing your emotions, they're constructing your version of reality. Now, think about what that implies. If your brain is a storyteller, then the quality of your life depends on the quality of your story. Not a story of delusion or denial, but one built on conscious choice. You can choose to reinterpret failure as feedback, discomfort as growth, uncertainty as possibility. You can train your mind to tell more accurate, empowering stories about who you are and what the world is. That's not motivational fluff. That's neuroscience. The wiring follows the narrative. So the next time you find yourself overwhelmed, pause and ask, what story is my brain telling me right now? And more importantly, is it true or just familiar? Because the familiar story isn't always the right one. Most of the time, it's just the oldest one. When you see that clearly, something shifts, the noise quiets. You realize the brain isn't your enemy. It's an incredible storyteller that's been trying to protect you all along. You just have to take the pen back. One of the most fascinating discoveries in neuroscience over the past few decades is that your brain doesn't wait for reality to arrive before it decides what's happening. It predicts constantly. Every second, it's running simulations of the world around you, forecasting what you're about to see, hear, feel, and think, then checking those predictions against the incoming data. In a way, you're living inside a continuous stream of educated guesses. What you call perception is really the brain's best attempt to confirm or correct those guesses fast enough for you to survive. This means you don't just experience the world, you predict it into being. When you walk into a room, your brain already has a model for what that space should look and feel like. It anticipates where the door is, what objects might be around, how bright the lighting will be, even what kind of mood you should be in. It fills in the gaps before you're consciously aware of them. That's why when something violates your expectation, like a step missing on a staircase, you get that strange jolt of surprise. Your brain had predicted stability, and reality didn't match. That prediction error feels like shock. But here's where it gets really interesting. Those predictions don't come from the outside world, they come from within you. They're shaped by your past experiences, your emotions, and your internal model of reality. If you've learned that people can't be trusted, your brain will predict betrayal even in innocent situations. If you've trained your mind to expect challenge as growth, you'll predict meaning even inside struggle. Both people might face the same situation, but one's brain predicts danger, the other predicts opportunity. And those predictions become their realities. Your nervous system is trying to keep you alive, not make you happy. It's designed to anticipate threat. That's why negative predictions tend to dominate their protective. The brain says, if I expect the worst, I can prepare for it. But over time, that pattern can become a prison. You begin to experience the world not as it is, but as your fears keep forecasting it to be. The cycle reinforces itself. Your brain predicts failure, you tense up, your behavior changes, and the result confirms your original prediction. The brain says, see, I was right. It's a self-fulfilling loop. To break that loop, you have to update the prediction model. That's what growth really is, the ability to consciously feed your brain new data, new experiences, new reference points that contradict the old narrative. When you step outside your comfort zone, when you deliberately expose yourself to challenge, when you breathe through fear instead of running from it, you're showing your brain that its prediction of threat was inaccurate, and when the prediction error is big enough, the brain adjusts, it rewrites the model. That's neuroplasticity in action: prediction, violation, correction, adaptation. Even something as simple as reframing a stressful event changes how your brain encodes it. If you tell yourself, I'm anxious, your prediction system gears up for danger, but if you say, I'm excited, the same physiological signals, heart rate, alertness, adrenaline, are reinterpreted as readiness instead of panic. The external data didn't change, the internal prediction did. That's why awareness is so crucial. If you can learn to notice what your brain is predicting in real time, you can begin to change the input before it solidifies into emotion or action. You can ask, what am I expecting right now? What story is my brain trying to confirm? That tiny gap between prediction and perception is the birthplace of freedom. Because once you can see the prediction, you don't have to obey it. You can challenge it. You can rewrite it. Every great transformation begins with this realization. Your brain is not a mirror of the world, it's a model of it. The accuracy of that model determines how you navigate life. When you change your model, your world changes not because the environment suddenly becomes easier, but because your brain starts predicting possibility instead of threat. And that's the essence of mental training, of growth, of mastery. You're not trying to escape fear or erase uncertainty. You're training your brain to predict strength in the face of it, to expect clarity where there used to be confusion. So as you move through your days, pay attention to what your brain assumes about the world. Because every moment before you see, before you feel, before you act, Your mind whispers a prediction about what's coming next. And over time, those whispers become your reality. When people talk about decision making, they often imagine it as a purely logical process, a clean, rational weighing of pros and cons. But the truth is, long before logic ever steps into the room, emotion has already made the first move. Every choice you make, from the food you eat to the relationships you pursue, begins as a wave of feeling deep in the emotional centers of the brain. The limbic system, especially the amygdala, is like a silent conductor directing your behavior long before your conscious mind knows the music has started. Your brain is constantly scanning your environment for signals of safety or danger. It interprets facial expressions, tone, posture, even subtle environmental cues, and it tags them with emotional meaning. These signals shape your state: calm, alert, anxious, hopeful. And that state determines how you interpret the world. When your body feels safe, your brain opens up, becomes curious, and can plan clearly. When your body feels threatened, your brain narrows its focus, cuts options, and defaults to protective patterns. The difference between those two states can change not just what you decide, but who you become in that decision. Imagine two people facing the same opportunity. One feels confident, regulated, open. The other feels uncertain, tense, closed off. The first sees possibility, the second sees risk. The external facts haven't changed, their internal physiology has. That's why emotional regulation is not a soft skill. It's the foundation of rational thought. Logic doesn't override emotion, it depends on it. Without emotional grounding, reasoning becomes chaotic. Without reasoning, emotion becomes impulsive. The two have to dance, not fight. This is why so many people feel trapped in repetitive patterns. They think they're making conscious choices, but what's really happening is that their nervous system is choosing for them. It's saying, "This feels familiar, this feels safe, let's go with that," even if the result is pain or limitation. Because the brain equates familiar with safe. That's how trauma, fear, and self-doubt replicate themselves. They keep the body in a loop of emotional prediction that logic alone can't break. But the reverse is also true. When you change your emotional state, you change what your brain predicts as possible. If you've ever noticed how different life feels after a good workout, deep rest, or a moment of genuine connection, that's not magic. That's neurobiology. Movement, breath, and focus all alter the balance of neurotransmitters and hormones that determine how your limbic system communicates with your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, reasoning, and self-control. When you calm your body, you quiet emotional noise. When you energize your body, you open cognitive flexibility. You're literally tuning the instrument that makes every decision you'll ever take. The challenge, of course, is that emotions can feel so real, so immediate, that it's hard to separate signal from story. Anger can disguise fear, sadness can mask exhaustion. Excitement and anxiety can share the same physical symptoms: heart racing, palms sweating, heightened alertness. But the interpretation changes everything. If your brain labels that activation as fear, you pull back. If it labels it as energy or anticipation, you lean in. The same chemistry, two completely different choices. That's why awareness is the first step to mastery. The moment you can notice, "I'm not just angry, I'm afraid of losing control," or "I'm not lazy, I'm overwhelmed," you shift from being inside the emotion to observing it, and that small distance is everything. It's where the thinking brain reconnects with the feeling brain. It's where choice becomes possible again. There's a saying in neuroscience, "Neurons that fire together wire together." Every time you respond to fear with curiosity instead of avoidance, those circuits strengthen. Every time you meet stress with breath instead of panic, you reinforce a pattern of resilience. Over time, your emotional responses evolve from reactive to responsive, from automatic to intentional. You train your brain to interpret emotional energy not as chaos, but as information about what matters to you, what needs attention, and where growth is waiting. In the end, emotion is not the enemy of reason. It's the language reason was built to translate. The goal isn't to suppress emotion or pretend logic is superior. It's to integrate them so that feeling fuels clarity instead of confusion. The most grounded, intelligent people you'll ever meet are not those who avoid emotion, but those who can feel deeply without being ruled by it. They listen to the body's signal, decode its meaning, and then choose their response with awareness. So the next time you're standing at the crossroads of a decision, pay attention not just to what you think, but to what you feel. Because that first whisper from the body is not weakness, it's wisdom. Learn to listen without obeying, to feel without drowning, and to act with awareness. Every second, your brain is bombarded by millions of bits of information: light, sound, movement, emotion, memory. But only a tiny fraction of that ever reaches your conscious awareness. What you call reality is not everything that exists out there. It's the small sliver your brain decides is worth noticing. It's a filtered version of the world, an edited movie cut down from an infinite stream of footage. The filters your brain uses to make sense of reality determine what you see, what you feel, and ultimately who you become. These filters are built from your past. Every experience you've ever had leaves a trace, a neural shortcut, a bias, a habit of focus. When something new happens, your brain instantly compares it to what it already knows and says, "Oh, this looks familiar," or "This feels dangerous," or "This reminds me of that time I failed." And in that split second, before you even realize it, perception has already been shaped. You're not seeing reality, you're seeing a prediction shaped by memory. If you've ever noticed how two people can look at the same situation and come away with completely different stories, that's why. One person sees rejection, the other sees redirection. One sees criticism, the other hears feedback. One sees chaos, the other sees potential. The difference isn't in the event, it's in the filter, and the brain loves to be consistent. Once it builds a filter, it tends to reinforce it. You notice things that confirm it and ignore the rest. That's called confirmation bias, and it's not just psychological, it's biological. The brain saves energy by noticing what it already believes to be true. That's a survival mechanism. It keeps your world predictable, but it can also limit you. If your filters were built during times of fear, failure, or pain, your brain will keep projecting those states into the present, even when life has changed. You'll keep seeing limitation where there's freedom, judgment where there's neutrality, and threat where there's opportunity. And the more you repeat that cycle, the deeper those filters embed themselves. Here's the good news: those filters are not permanent. They're dynamic. Your attention is the editing tool. Whatever you focus on, your brain strengthens. Whatever you ignore, it weakens. When you start paying attention to what's working, to what's beautiful, to what's possible, the brain recalibrates its filters to include those realities too. This isn't about pretending everything is positive. It's about expanding your perceptual range so you can see more of what's actually there. Training your perception begins with awareness. Try this. The next time you feel stuck or frustrated, pause and ask, "What am I not seeing?" That question interrupts the automatic filter. It forces the brain to look for new data. It turns on curiosity, the antidote to rigidity. Curiosity opens perception while judgment closes it. That's why children learn so fast. Their filters are thin. They explore before deciding what's safe or unsafe, possible or impossible. Adults, on the other hand, often live inside pre-decided narratives, mistaking old filters for truth. You can relearn that childlike flexibility. Mindfulness practices, for instance, help quiet the habitual filters by bringing attention to raw sensory data, what you actually see, hear, and feel without the mental commentary. Gratitude works the same way. It trains your brain to notice positive cues it used to overlook. Even deliberate exposure to discomfort, like physical training or facing fears, teaches the brain to update its threat filters. Each time you face what once seemed unbearable and realize you survived, the brain rewrites its internal map of reality. Every experience, every perspective you challenge, expands your perceptual field. You begin to notice that what felt like a wall was often just a doorway your mind had labeled closed. You start realizing that other people aren't necessarily the villains your bias painted them to be, they're human beings shaped by their own filters too. And in that moment of understanding, perception becomes empathy. When you change how you see, you change how you live. Your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, they all flow downstream from perception. The world doesn't need to change for your experience to improve, your filters do. The greatest shift isn't in the world outside you, but in the lens through which you interpret it. So the question isn't, what is the world showing me? The question is, what am I allowing myself to see? Because your perception is not a window, it's a mirror. It doesn't just reflect the world, it reflects you. One of the most extraordinary things about the human brain is that it's not static. It's not fixed at birth, and it's not sealed by adulthood. Every thought, every action, every emotion, every repetition literally reshapes its structure. This capacity is called neuroplasticity, and it means that the brain is constantly rewriting itself based on how you use it. It learns what you practice, it builds what you repeat, and it deletes what you neglect. That's both empowering and sobering, because it means that who you are today is not the result of fate, it's the result of training. The way you think, how you react, what you believe about yourself, all of it has been wired in through repetition. And most of that wiring didn't happen consciously. It happened through habits, through daily thought patterns, through the emotions you let run on repeat. If you've practiced worry for 10 years, your brain has become exceptional at worrying. If you've practiced self-doubt, it's built efficient circuits for self-doubt. But if you practice presence, discipline, compassion, those networks strengthen instead. The brain doesn't care what it learns, it just learns. That's what makes it so powerful, and also what makes it dangerous when left unattended. You're sculpting your neural architecture every day, whether you realize it or not. Every repeated behavior is a signal to the brain. This matters. Keep this. Every time you focus on something, you're feeding it energy and attention. The neurons involved in that pattern fire together, and by firing together, they wire together. Over time, what was once a choice becomes automatic. That's how personality forms, that's how identity forms. You become fluent in your own repeated thoughts. But that also means change is always possible. When you introduce new experiences, when you challenge yourself, when you learn, when you push past the comfort zone, your brain has to adapt. It forges new pathways to meet new demands. That's why discomfort and growth always travel together. The brain needs that friction to evolve. The unfamiliar forces it to reorganize. Think about the first time you learned a skill: driving, playing an instrument, public speaking. At first it was clumsy, the circuits were weak, but with repetition the neural connections grew thicker, faster, more synchronized. What was once hard became natural. That's plasticity at work. It's not magic, it's biology, and it doesn't stop when you grow older. The only thing that changes is how intentional you become about the process. When people say things like, "That's just the way I am," they're describing a temporary snapshot of a living system that could change if trained differently. The brain is not a stone, it's a river, and the current flows wherever attention and repetition direct it. Patterns that define you now are simply the ones that have been reinforced the most. The question is, are they the ones you want to keep? Changing them starts small. You don't have to dismantle your whole life. You just need to give your brain consistent, undeniable evidence that a new pattern is worth keeping. That means repetition, consistency, emotional intensity. When the brain senses that something matters to your survival or your sense of self, it prioritizes it. That's why small daily practices, breathing, journaling, exercise, reflection, can create profound long-term change. They signal to your brain, "This is who I am becoming." Over time, the brain believes it. Of course, it's not always easy. The old circuits don't disappear immediately, they weaken. The new ones strengthen through use. For a while, both exist at once, and that's when people feel the most resistance. That tension, that pull between the old and the new, is the brain literally rewiring itself. That discomfort isn't failure. It's evidence that transformation is underway. You can think of neuroplasticity like sculpting clay that never hardens. Each day, your thoughts, your emotions, your focus, these are the hands shaping the sculpture. You can leave it unattended and let it be shaped by fear, distraction, and habit. Or you can take responsibility for the form it's becoming. The difference between stagnation and growth is not talent, it's training. And here's the deeper truth. The moment you start seeing your brain as adaptable, the moment you realize that change is not just possible, but inevitable, your relationship with challenge shifts. You stop fearing difficulty and start seeking it, because you understand that struggle is not the enemy, it's the signal that your brain is building new capacity. Every time you learn something new, every time you override an old reaction, every time you stay calm where you used to break, you're literally altering your biology. You're not the same person afterward. The patterns have changed. At some point in your life, you realize that everything you experience, every joy, every frustration, every sense of meaning or confusion, is not coming directly from the world around you, but from how your brain interprets it. The world itself is neutral. It's sound waves, light waves, vibrations, molecules. It's your brain that turns all of that raw data into color, music, faces, words, and emotion. That means the quality of your inner world depends not on what happens to you, but on the framework through which you interpret it. And that realization changes everything. When you begin to understand this, you stop trying to control every detail of the outside world, and you start taking responsibility for the only thing you ever truly control, your response. Consciousness is that space between stimulus and reaction, the place where awareness meets choice. It's small, sometimes just a breath wide, but in that space lies the power to reshape your entire life. Because it's in that space that you can see what your brain is doing, how it's interpreting, labeling, predicting, and decide whether you want to keep running that pattern or choose a new one. Most people don't live from that place of consciousness. They live as if they're being pulled through life by invisible strings of habit and emotion. They react to what happens, they justify it afterward, and they call it fate. But the truth is, the brain is always listening to what you reinforce. If you keep reacting with anger, it gets better at anger. If you keep choosing patience, it strengthens the networks for patience. Over time, the brain becomes a mirror of your consistent state of consciousness. What you practice being is what you become. This is why self-awareness isn't just a philosophical idea. It's a biological necessity for freedom. When you're aware, you can intervene. You can catch the story before it hardens into belief. You can pause the automatic emotional surge long enough to question it. Is this reaction serving me, or is it just familiar? That single question activates a different network in your brain, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for conscious regulation, empathy, and long-term thinking. The moment awareness enters, you shift from survival mode to creation mode. You move from being driven by the past to designing the present. The deeper you practice this, the more you realize that consciousness is not just something you have, it's something you cultivate. You train it the same way you train focus or strength or memory, through repetition, through attention, through honest observation. Meditation, reflection, journaling, these aren't abstract rituals, they're neural training for awareness. Each time you step back from your thoughts and simply watch them without judgment, you weaken the brain's identification with them. You remind yourself that thoughts are events, not commands. You become the observer, not the storm. And when that awareness grows, your relationship with reality changes. You start noticing that the world responds differently to you when you stop fighting it and start engaging with it consciously. Instead of reacting from fear or pride or old stories, you begin to act from alignment, from the part of you that is stable no matter what happens outside. You realize that your consciousness doesn't just interpret reality, It participates in shaping it. The energy you bring into a situation, your state, your focus, your emotional tone literally changes the way others respond, the way opportunities appear, the way outcomes unfold. That's not mysticism, it's physiology. The brain and body function as a feedback loop. Your internal state influences your perception guides your behavior, and your behavior reshapes your external reality. It's a constant exchange between inner and outer worlds. When you master the inner one, the outer begins to align. Of course, it takes practice. The old patterns will always try to pull you back: fear, doubt, reactivity, but each moment of awareness is another step toward mastery. Every time you pause,